Contracts. Every NHL team has signed some good and bad ones that affect their present and future. Over the past few days, I've talked about both Eastern Conference divisions, and today we're going to start the Western Conference with the Central Division. Now, we're going to go through each team in this division, talking about which contracts are worse for the team right now and for their future. Now, we're going to be conquering the Pacific Division in the next video, so before we get started today, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I post daily NHL and hockey related content, so make sure you do that now, and let's get right into it. The first team for the Central Division is the Chicago Blackhawks, and this one is a pretty big layup. There's one contract on this team that notoriously gets made fun of, and that's the Seth Jones one. Now, this one is awful for a Blackhawks team that is currently rebuilding. Jones signed a 7-year, $9.5 AAV contract that really isn't all that bad right now, but when the Hawks start to get good again, this deal could really start to bother people a little bit more. This isn't a knock on Seth Jones, really. He's a fine player and would probably make a great defenseman on a contending team, but the marriage between him and the Chicago Blackhawks was always a weird one to me. When Jones signed with the Blackhawks, it felt like they were going for one last run with Taves and Kane, but right now his contract with the current state of the Chicago Blackhawks just really makes no sense to me. They're clearly rebuilding with Connor Bedard, and the rest of their roster just is not NHL level, so a few years from now this one might smell a bit more in Chicago, but hopefully Jones will be able to get his money here and then go play for a contending team, because I do think his game is a little bit better than what we're seeing in Chicago. For right now though, this is the worst one on their team. Now, when it comes to the Arizona Coyotes, they don't really have a bad contract, but if there's one player who I can think of that's making more money than they should be in Arizona, it would be Lawson Crouse. At 26 years old, Crouse is making $4.3 million a year for 4 years and has never really produced a season above 40 points. He has back-to-back 20-goal seasons, but this is on a Coyotes team that's rebuilding, so there's a lot of guys that will get looks playing on a team that isn't exactly ready to win. Crouse is a fine player, but the contract just feels like a little bit of an overkill for the type of player Crouse is. His contract won't hold Arizona back, but it's definitely not the ideal one for the type of player that he is. For this next one, I had a pretty hard time finding a contract on this team that really felt bad for the Colorado Avalanche, and there really isn't one. But then I started thinking about Gabriel Landeskog's future and felt maybe this is the one that will age poorly for this team. Now, before I even start on this, Landeskog is a brilliant player. I think he's a great leader on the ice and off, and makes a huge impact on this club. Right now he's on an 8-year, $52 million contract, making around $7 million per season. Now, when on the ice, this deal makes complete sense, but if Landeskog's injury is as bad as people have been saying, then we may never see him fully healthy for the Avalanche again, and that's the scary part of this. It's not really a bad deal for the type of player. I'm just really concerned about his injury and how this will impact the Colorado Avalanche moving forward. Landeskog is a crucial piece to this team, and you can see that in last year's playoffs and how they've been performing this year. Colorado is still a great team, but without Landeskog, it feels like they're missing a piece to the puzzle. Hopefully I'm wrong about this. It's not really a bad contract, but more just a concerning one. Next up is the Dallas Stars. This team has some amazing contracts on their roster, and I feel like last season I would have found the answer for this question very easily. But this one player I had in mind has really proven that he's still a solid NHL center worth a contract. Tyler Seguin is currently on a 4-year deal making around $10 million a season, and it's not that it's the worst contract, but I feel like if you're making $10 million a season, you need to be around the 70 to 80 point scorer, not a 40 to 50 point scorer, which is the standard that we expect from Seguin, so he's just underperforming. This is especially brutal for the Stars since they have players like Roope Hintz and Jason Robertson who are playing way better hockey on much cheaper deals. This isn't really a terrible contract because Seguin has picked up his game, but he has been slightly underperforming and is technically the worst performing contract player on this deep Dallas Stars team. Now, Minnesota, this is a tough one because you can talk about a lot of different things here. The Philip Gustafsson contract hasn't started out all that great, but I think the Wild have one contract that is slightly more confusing. No, I'm not going to mention the Zach Parise or Ryan Suter contracts. I feel like that's an easy one, so I'm going to give you guys a little bit more of a detailed contract here in the Frederick Goodrow one. Now, there's nothing wrong with this player. He's a 30-year-old journeyman who, let's be honest, isn't expected to do all that much, but the problem here is that the Wild are still trying to get out of that sticky situation from those Parise and Suter contracts that have just been limiting their cap space. So I'm not really a big fan of this team signing these long-term deals for players who really aren't producing. Sure, he's only making $2 million a year for a guy who could potentially score 40 points, which would be great for their roster, but when he's underperforming and you see him just taking up some cap space without producing, I feel like that's just not the kind of contracts you want to see Minnesota signing. Not the worst deal on this list, but I thought it would be worth pointing out. I'd like to see Minnesota sign less of these kind of deals and more solid players players on very fair deals based on their production. That way they don't get into a similar situation as the Parise and Suter deals that they've been trying to get out of for years. Now, I realize the Nashville Predators have always been a more defensive-minded team, but when they brought in Ryan McDonagh, I always thought this deal was weird. McDonagh signed a 7-year, $47 million contract and is 34. I feel like his best hockey is behind him at this point, and the Predators are paying a lot for a guy that just doesn't really impact the game all that much. McDonagh is fine and does enough for the Predators, but I feel like it's a bit of an overpay for a guy at his age and stage of his career. Not like he's making a huge difference, and they're sort of a middling team right now, so I would like to see some better players added to this roster, not just veterans on some long-term deals that really just don't make sense for the team. I would love to see a little bit more direction from the Nashville Predators, I guess is what I'm saying. Considering that the St. Louis Blues were looking to move Torrey Krug at last year's deadline, I think it's safe to say that even they aren't big fans of his contract. Krug signed a 7-year, $45 million contract with the Blues in the 2020-2021 season, and when he signed the deal, it felt like the right decision. When they signed Krug, the Blues were coming off a championship season and were still looking to push for another cup, but unfortunately right now their team is being reconstructed and it feels like Krug just isn't a part of their future. Krug is an offensive defenseman and the Blues desperately need more defense. His contract is holding them back from signing someone else, and his no movement clause to certain teams has really limited the moves that they can make. Last season they tried to dish him to Philadelphia, but Krug rejected it, meaning that the Blues are obviously ready to move on from him, but can they find a suitable trade to get something back for him, or will they be burned in another deal? Just a tough contract for the Blues. I think this one speaks for itself. Last team on this list, and this one I really had a hard time finding a contract that was bad. The only deal that I think the Jets were a bit wrong on is the Neil Pionk deal, where he signed a 4-year, $23.5 million contract. The bad news is that Pionk isn't great in his own end, and his offensive game just doesn't justify almost $6 million that they pay him every year. The good news though is that he only has one more season on the deal, so the Jets won't be held back by this, and hopefully if he ups his game, the Jets can get their money's worth on the deal. But these are the worst contracts across every NHL Central Division team. Let me know what you guys think about my picks in the comments below, and let me know if I missed someone that is worth mentioning on this list. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. I will see you guys in the next one.